YouTube, we're going to look at this lineman manual, and we're going to look at the hulls. We're going to do a little series here on hulls and primers and powder and wad, shot, things like that. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I use. I don't use all of these, but I do have these. But there's a lot of confusion that goes on with what is what. Tapered hulls, straight wall hulls, and I want to offer you maybe a little bit of clarity as to what they're talking about. I will recommend, if you don't have a Lyman 5th edition manual, that you pick one of those up. The reason I would recommend that is because if you look in the manual, in the very first section, it talks about hulls, and it gives you real size diagrams of these hulls. And if you go to the 12 gauge, which we're going to talk about 12, 16, and 20, but this will be true no matter what gauge we're talking about. If we're going to look at 12 gauge, we'll go to 12 gauge and we'll look at the double A's, which is a very popular shell. The double A 12 gauge is a tapered hull, and you can see the cross section there. So what's the difference in a tapered hull and a straight wall hull? Well, I'll go to a straight wall hull and show you the difference. Another popular shell out there is the Remington Nitros, Nitro Gold, and the Remington Premier STS shells. Those are very popular. They're kind of slick. I like to say they're slick like a crayon. They don't have any ribs on them like some of these straight wall shells. You can hear my thumb across that, but when I put my thumb across this, there's nothing there because there's no ribs on the side of it. A straight wall shell, I have two Remington straight wall shells here. This is a Remington, I don't know what this was. It was originally a buckshot shell, but it's ribbed on the sides. Now, just because they're ribbed on the side or smooth on the side does not mean that one is automatically a straight wall shell and one of them is not, because the let's see if I got something here. The Remington gun clubs, which is these here, they're ribbed, but they're a tapered shell like this. This is the Remington. That's the Remington STS Premier. It's also, you can see my notes right there, it's also the same as the Remington Gold Nitro, the Remington Gun Club. I wrote low brass right there, but brass height, that don't matter. It don't make a difference. But the straight wall shell for Remington, you can see the difference. You see that flat base right there? It's flat, and the shell goes straight up and out of it. They're usually in, a lot of times they're in a high brass. I'm not going to say that it's 100% high brass, low brass, but you see the difference? The difference is these sidewalls right here. See how that starts getting thicker the closer you get to the base? That is called a tapered hull, and that is called a straight walled hull. That's what you need to know. You need to know the load data. Every piece of data, whether it's Lyman like the book I've got right now, or whether it is Ballistic Products, Precision Reloading, Hodgdon, Alliant, Accurate Powders, whoever does it, if they're dealing with shotguns, it is what I like to call, what they call load specific. They have a load that is designed for that. Now, the reason I want to make this is because I hear people all the time, and I see people on Facebook and stuff say, well, I've got such and such powder and I've got this and that's all I've got to work with, I can't afford anything else, can you recommend something for me? Well, no, because that's not the way it works. You can't just take what you've got and throw it all together and say, well, this is what I'm going to use. I have seen it. I'll tell you a little story. Long time ago, my dad shared this story with me. whenever he was getting into reloading. He's been reloading for, I'll be 39 in a few weeks, and he's been reloading long before I was born, so 50 years plus. But somebody would go in, he'd be getting maybe some powder or some primers or some wads or something, and somebody would say, why don't we get into reloading? They say, well, here's you some primers, here's you some wads, here's you some powder, this is pretty popular, that's pretty popular. Well, it's all popular. I mean, it's all popular stuff. There's nothing that's not popular about this stuff. It's all big time stuff. But you have to be careful with it, because the space that you have in these shells, if I was to take this load that puts in this STS, or this load that goes in this nitro, or even these are all 3 AA, these AA Winchesters, you know, they're all tapered shells. These are, and I know that. The reason I know that is not only do I look in the lineman manual that I showed you, I know that because I've cut the shell. I've cut the shells just to see myself what they are. If you have any doubt as to what you have, what the base wad looks like, cut a shell. Shells are, you know, a dime a dozen, or a dime for 2 dozen, or whatever. It's not that bad. Just cut a shell and see what you've got. But if I was to take this load that goes in these holes right here and put them in here, will they fire? Yes. Are they supposed to go in this shell? Maybe. The reason I say maybe is there a load in a published data book that calls for it to go in these shells? Can you just substitute willy-nilly one hole for the other hole? Well, refer back to this. I'm going to say something here I wouldn't say to a lot, but when it comes to reloading, you need to find a manual that you trust almost as much as you would trust the Bible. Because when you pull that gun up to your shoulder and you pull the trigger, that shell is sitting about right here in front of your face. And if something was to go wrong, that might be the last shell you ever get to shoot. That might be the last time your hands work. That might be the last time your eyes are attached to your body. That might be the last time you're alive. This is not something you can play around with. I'm stressing that. Not to try to be rude, or not to try to be mean or inconsiderate. I'm just, I worry sometimes with everybody that's just, there's a lot of bad stuff on YouTube. And some people may look at this and say, well, this is bad too. And that's fine. I can take the hit. But I only go with published information. I don't recommend to people, well, you can substitute this wad or that wad, or you can substitute this hole for that hole. I just don't do it. I find out a hole that I have, and then I find a load that works in that hole, and I look at all the components that goes with that. Make sure that I've got them. So, without any further information, or with any further ado, of course you're going to get more information. You can tell I don't do much editing on these. I've covered the fact that the tapered holes that I use, and I can only speak to what I use, is the 3 AA 12 gauge Winchester, the 2 Nitro Gold and Remington STS. These are both the same shell, they're just different. I gotta plug this camera in. This is tapered hole. These are tapered. These Remingtons here, tapered, tapered. Now let's look at straight wall. These 2 Remingtons, this was originally a high-speed steel. It's high brass, but it doesn't matter. If it's high brass or low brass, doesn't matter. Matters what the base wad's like. Remember I showed you that picture. Refer back to that picture I showed you where you could see the base wad where the hull was straight. That's considered a straight wall shell. So these are considered straight wall shells. These 2 Remingtons right here, these are my favorite 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch steel shot hulls. You cannot get better than these. That's me. This is what I like to use. The reason I like that is because they take an American primer. and they're made in the USA. Other straight wall shells that I use because I like to diversify, I like to have a color coding system, and I'll share that with you later on, is these here. I'll go through these. This is a Fiocchi. Fiocchi has different base wad heights. Sometimes it pays to know what you have. There's the base wad. It's a flat walled, straight walled, flat base wad. This is a Kent, but here's something you need to know about the Kents. You may or may not be able to see down inside there, and I don't have a good enough light to get in there. If you'll go to Kent's website, they'll tell you what shell they use. You know what they use? Shadite, however they say that. So, that's a Shadite. Straight walled, flat base wad shell. This is a Rio. This is what I started out reloading. If I didn't have the Remingtons, this is it. It's good plastic. I can get a lot of loads out of them. The only thing that I don't like is that with all of these shells, the Fiocchi, the Shadite, the Rios, they use a European or a metric sized primer. So that primer is bigger than an American sized primer. And when you put, I'll see if I can show you here. I'll deprime this. Well, maybe. I won't do it on the 16 gauge, will I? So that's deprimed. I did that on the Mech 9000 a little bit. It's just off the screen there, so it's been resized also. Let's take an American primer. American Winchester 209 primer. Just to let you know, this is a Rio hull. Let's watch what happens when I take an American primer and I can take this and just about, I can see there, I pushed it in flat with my finger. No good. No good. Pressure can build up and that will push out. You don't want that. You do not want that. See, I don't know if I've got another Rio shell. I think I do. Yeah. Here's a Rio hull, but it's a very tall base wad. I'll deprime that. Now, what I have in my little drawer here is, can you guess? Rio primers. You know what Rio primers are going to do? Well, let's just look at what Rio primers are going to do. Rio primers are going to fit in a Rio shell tight. There is no pushing that in there with your finger. It's going to go in there tight. It's going to seal. It's going to stay, which is what I want. You want that to be tight. You want it to seal. You don't want pressure coming this way. You want pressure building up on your powder, pushing your wad and your shot out the barrel. That covers straight wall shells and the European primer sizes that you'll run into for 12 gauge. And I hope that will give you some advice, some things to do there. All of these, tapered, Remington, Winchester, they're all tapered. All of these that are on this side right here, the Kent, the Shadite, which is the same shell, no matter if it's low or high brass, remember. The Fiocchi, the two Rios, those are all straight walled shells, but they take a European sized primer. I do have Shadite primers for the Shadite shells. It's just a personal thing to stick with it. These are not Rio. These are Remingtons. They are American sized primer, but they're a straight wall shell. They're American made. So that's what I want to get across to you. I hope it's not coming across confusing. I don't use a script. I'm just as real as it gets. And I kind of just want to talk from the hip here a little bit. Moving on to 16 gauge, we're going to look at this. I've got 4 16 gauge Winchester shells right here. 5 if you want to count this one. All those. Trying to see if I can get a clear shot here. I don't know what I did with, there it is. See if I can block my mug out of the shot here and make it focus. There you go. Winchester. Winchester Upland. It doesn't make a difference. It does not make a difference what it says on the shell. It matters what's on the inside. So, these are all the same shell. I know that because I can look inside them and I can see if I can find one you can look in, if it shows it anything in there. I can look inside them and I can see that they all have the same base wad. They're all the same shell regardless to what it says on the outside, regardless to how high or how low the brass is. Same shell. I can put, when it calls for this, whatever it calls for, in a compression formed, or what I call the AA 16, I can put it in this load. I know I can do that. It's not going to hurt anything. Back to the lineman manual, to the shell cutaway section, 16 gauge. That inside of those tapered shells look just like that. That is a Winchester compression formed plastic 16 gauge 2 3/4 inch, regardless of base height. I mean, regardless of brass. See right there, high or low brass, smooth sided. One thing I found whenever I was going through some of these shells is this. This is a compression formed tapered. Look what it says on the side here, if you can read that. Steel shot. These were kind of anemic. They ran about 1275 feet per second, which is not good for steel. 7/8 ounce. I like 7/8 ounce, but still, it needs to be going a little bit faster than that for my taste. So that's 16 gauge tapered holes. That's the ones that I use. There may be others out there. They may make them in Remington and other stuff. But if they do, I'm not aware of it. This is, like I said, this is just the stuff that I use, so I can only go off my experience. This Winchester, however, is a straight-walled shell. It is not a tapered shell. It is the same as this Shadite, which, like I said earlier, let me shut these drawers and I'll, you see this green shell, there's no words on it. How do I know what it is? Base wad. This is the same kind of green shell, but it's got words written all over it. Tungsten matrix, impact, it's a Kent, 1 1/4 ounce, number 6 shot. If you look at the inside, identical base wads. Shadite. You look at this base wad, Shadite. You look at this base wad in this Browning shell, 16 gauge Browning shell. What do you find? Shadite. You start doing it long enough and you can start seeing it. You look inside the Herder's 16 gauge shell. What do you see? Shadite. Red Shadite base wad. Color doesn't matter either. Red base wads, white base wads, yellow base wads. Doesn't matter what the color is. That just has to do with the amount of plastic coloring they put in the mold and the resin. But these are all the same shell, so I can put the same load in them regardless of color on the outside, regardless of what they say. Base wad. Make sure you look at the base wad. This Rio shell, let me see if I can get, I'm looking for the light here, that way I can look inside there. It has a different base wad than these. And this Remington black shell has a different base wad than all of them. It's a straight walled shell, but they're, like I said, it's all load specific. And they do make, Remington does make, and I'll show you this here, that black Remington shell that I just showed you is the same as this green Remington shell right here, green 16 gauge. It's the same, black, green, that part doesn't matter. I do have, let me get it off the shelf here, I do have, a little dusty, green Remington Express 16 gauge. These are factory because I wanted the shells. And it's number 4s, which I don't shoot that often. So sometimes if you're not going to shoot a particular shot size very often, it may be more economical for you just to buy them than to buy up all the supplies and have them laying around. That green shell, the green Remington shell, and the black Remington shell are the same. You need to look at the base wads. Base wads, base wads, base wads. So that hopefully covers the 16 gauge. Now let's look at the 20 gauge. I don't load steel shot in 20 gauge yet. I don't have a need for it. Most of everything that I load, matter of fact, everything that I load is in a 2 3/4 inch shell. I don't load a 3-inch shell, and I don't load a 3.5-inch shell. I've shot 3.5-inch shells, and if you've never shot a 3.5-inch shell, and you wonder why I don't shoot a 3.5-inch shell, then if you're a shotgunner, shoot a 3.5-inch shell, and then get back with me in your comments, and you'll know why. Because you increase the payload, and you try to keep that high velocity. Anytime you increase the payload, 1.25 ounces, 1 3/8 ounces, 1.5 ounces, you're trying to push it at 1,500 plus feet per second on steel shot, something's going to be on the receiving end of a lot of a mule kick, and that's going to be the recoil of your nice shoulder. Now, I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6'3", 240 pounds. I work out, but still, it still can kick you like crazy. 20 gauge, I've got 3 Winchesters. It's a Winchester Super X. That's pretty old. There's a Winchester AA. There's a new Winchester AA. But there's something about these shells. They're the same. Now this is the AA, what they call the AA HS. Let me see if I can get you a picture of it with just my hand. AA HS. High strength. They load the same. Instead of being a 1-piece shell, it's a 2-piece or 3-piece shell. 3-piece being the, if you count the brass. They load the same though, so you can do identical stuff with them. But I don't load steel shot, so I don't have a flat or straight walled 20 gauge shell to share with you. I will show you in here, if I can find one, what they look like. Here you go. There's a Shadite 20 gauge flat. See that? Flat, straight. When you go to the Remington on the very next page, you run across that taper, that little taper right there. You got to look for that. The same thing is true in the Winchester. There's the HS. That line right there represents the fact that that's a separate base wad, but it's high strength. And if you go down one, you run into the compression formed, and they are the same. As a matter of fact, it even says it on there. It says, loading data for the 20 gauge Winchester HS case will interchange with the 20 gauge Winchester compression formed data. It says it on the 12 gauge too. So that covers hulls. I do want to leave you with a side note. The reason I have straight walled shells and I have tapered shells. My straight walled shells are my steel shot shells. My tapered shells are my lead shot. That's a pretty simple thing. You can automatically know when you pick up a shell, if it's got steel or if it's got lead in it, primarily because when you pick it up, see if I can find one here that's there you go. There's a loaded AA 12 gauge. This is a magnet. Doesn't stick. No magnet. Magnet does not stick to that. But if I was to pick up, I know I've got some around here somewhere. This is an estate, but it's a shadite. There's no way for me to cover every shell that I have, but I'm covering all the types of shells that I have. I know that's steel shot. Why? Because steel sticks to the magnet. It's where I want it to do. So my straight walled shells, all these over here for 12 gauge, are going to have steel shot in them. And my tapered shells, so all these right here, are going to have lead shot in them. And that's one of the ways that I code things. From there, I'll color code it by shot size and different powders that I use. Coming up, we're going to look in the very next video, we're going to look at primers. That'll be not going to be a long video, not going to be near as long as this one, because primers are relatively straightforward, but they do have different heat ranges, and I will show you some sections and reasons why I think you need to get a Lyman 5th edition in that. So anyways, hope that helps. I know I'm looking at the clock right now. This is about a 28-minute video, and if you made it this far, well, God bless you. If you have any questions, or if I didn't cover anything that you think you need to ask me about, if you want to, I'll be glad to answer them as best I can. But until then, we're signing off for now. Take care.